Let's talk about a leader who is most powerful, most influential work came not from a position of strength, but from his absolute darkest hour, inside a prison cell.
Now, listen to these words. They're just filled with this incredible, almost defiant joy. But here's the thing. They weren't written from a comfy study. They were written from prison. And that just makes you wonder, right? How is it even possible to find joy when you're in chains?
So how could this be possible? Well, the answer is all about a massive shift in perspective. You see, the world saw him as a prisoner of the Roman Empire, a guy whose freedom was totally gone. But that's not how Paul saw it. He saw himself as a prisoner of Jesus Christ. And that simple change in wording reframed his entire reality. And this gets us right to the heart of his incredible resilience. He had this radical mindset that took his imprisonment and turned it from a huge limitation into a powerful platform for his message. He didn't see himself as just some common criminal, a captive of Rome. No way. In his own words, he was an ambassador in chains. I mean, think about that for a second. That is such a brilliant way to reframe things. See, an ambassador's authority isn't about where they are. It's about who they represent. His mission wasn't on pause. It just had a new and very captive audience. And get this, from inside that prison, he wrote some of the most influential texts in all of history. These 4 letters, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon, are now known as the prison epistles, and they've been shaping Christian thought for, well, thousands of years. And let's make no mistake, this was not some cushy situation. Even when he was under house arrest in Rome, he was physically chained to a soldier from the Praetorian Guard. We're talking about the emperor's elite force of about 14,000 men. His every single move was being watched. This chart really shows you where his head was at. His energy, his focus, it wasn't on the chains or the guards or the complete injustice of it all. It was overwhelmingly fixed on his mission, on the message he carried that he believed was bigger than any prison. Okay, so to see how this all played out in real life, let's look at our first case study. What happened in the city of Philippi, which was a major Roman outpost up in Macedonia. So in Philippi, after being wrongly accused, beaten really badly, and publicly humiliated, Paul and his friend Silas were thrown into the inner prison. And just to make it even worse, their feet were fastened in stocks. I mean, we're talking about a seriously painful way to be restrained. But then, at midnight, right in that darkest, most painful moment, something pretty incredible happened. Instead of moaning in despair, the prison was filled with the sound of them praying and singing hymns. But here's the kicker, that last part, and the prisoners were listening to them. And this just shows you the direct result of their wild faith. The persecution leads to imprisonment, which leads to this midnight worship service, which, unbelievably, leads to the conversion of their own jailer and his entire family. They literally turned a dungeon into a church. But Paul's influence wasn't just about what was happening right in front of him. Being locked up actually forced him to get creative, to completely innovate his whole approach to leadership. Think about it. He couldn't go on his usual missionary trips traveling from city to city. So he had to pivot. He started writing letters, and even more importantly, he started empowering his followers to become leaders themselves, to carry the message and build new communities for him. Let's take the city of Colossae, for example. There's no record that Paul ever even set foot in that city, and yet he wrote a whole super detailed letter to the church there. So how on earth did that happen? Well, it's a perfect example of his new strategy. See, while Paul was in the nearby city of Ephesus, a guy named Epaphras heard him speak. Epaphras, who was actually from Colossae, was so inspired that he took the message back to his own hometown and started a church there himself. Paul's influence wasn't just about getting more followers, it was about creating more leaders. And you know, his influence was also deeply personal. From that prison, he wrote this short but really powerful letter to a man named Philemon. He was sending back Philemon's runaway slave, Onesimus, but he made a plea that would have been absolutely shocking back then. Welcome him back, not as your property, but as a beloved brother. He was trying to change hearts, not just minds. So, what does all this add up to? What's the real legacy of his time in prison? I mean, how did a prison cell actually end up changing the world? It all boils down to this incredible paradox. The goal of the Roman Empire was pretty simple: shut down this troublesome movement and lock up its leader. But the actual result was the exact opposite.
By imprisoning him, they ended up amplifying his message through his letters and unleashing his influence by forcing him to delegate. An early church leader named Tertullian just nailed this idea a couple of centuries later. He basically said that every time someone tried to crush the movement, it just made it grow stronger. Persecution, weirdly enough, became the fuel for its own expansion. So in the end, Paul's story really shows us that sometimes our biggest limitations can become our most powerful platforms. And it kind of challenges all of us to look beyond our own chains and ask a tough question. When we're facing our own trials, what larger purpose can we find?